want to welcome you to the Toronto Zoo. Um, you may have recently heard the zoo had to close its doors to the public, but there's two things that we tried to do the entire time, no matter what. And that number one priority was to make sure that all of our animals were cared for in the exact same way, in the high level that we always do. So that is always continued. Number two, we wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, we wanted everyone to still be able to access the zoo, to be able to see those animals that they love. And one of the ways that we've been doing that recently is by hosting virtual experiences, such as the one that you're in right now. I'll talk more about it at the end, but for now, what we're going to do is let's go on a little walk through one of the regions of our zoo, which is the Australasia Pavilion. And what we're going to do is we'll take a tour through here and see what we can find on our way through. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you might cover in any of the grades, such as kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, something like that. So let's go see what we can find. I think the first thing I'm going to do is flip my camera over so you see what I see the entire time, and I'll just keep on talking as we go. So like I said, we're inside the Australasia Pavilion. Now, a pavilion, like Australasia Pavilion, is a place where we keep animals and plants that require a certain climate or environment. So the environment inside this building is very warm and very humid. So if you can imagine yourself in the summertime, sitting on a beach, and it's a nice hot day in the summer, that's exactly what it's like inside this building every single day. And that's exactly how the animals and the plants like it. So we try and keep it that way all the time. Now we're going to go for an exploration. We'll go through the building and see what we can find. And as we find the animals, I'll tell some information about them as we go. The first place we're going to enter into here is what we call an aviary. So an aviary is just a fancy word that means a room where birds fly around. So guess what? We're probably going to find some birds when we walk around in here. Now we have to look close because the birds will try to stay away from us and hide. And there's one right there. And if I get too close, you'll see what happens. And away they go. That's okay. There's different varieties of birds that are found inside this aviary. There's actually a different variety of every type of animal inside of this pavilion, and we're going to see if we can find them all, or whatever we can find. So we have birds. We're seeing birds now. We also have some mammals in here, some reptiles, amphibians, fish. We're going to try and find as much of this as we possibly can. The very first bird that we're going to try and see right now is trying to hide and doing a really good job at it, except for I'm smart, and I figured out where they were hiding at. And this is called a tawny frogmouth. Now, the tawny frogmouth uses camouflage to hide itself so that you can't see it. And that's what this one's doing. It's just, I discovered where they were. So check it out, I'll show you. It's just hanging out up here. Oh, he knows we're looking at him. So a tawny frogmouth's the type of bird. It's called a frogmouth because it has a wide mouth that kind of looks like a frog's. And it maybe even eats a frog if it can catch one. But that's a good example of a bird that uses camouflage. You can see how camouflaged his feathers are to be able to hide. Now, lots of birds want to hide because they don't want anything to bother them. But some birds don't mind if others see them. So they have nice, beautiful colors to show off. And we're going to see those guys on the ground here in a sec. I'll come around the corner and we'll see. And those are Victoria crowned pigeons, and they're a beautiful blue color. And you can see they're called a crowned pigeon because they have a big crown on their head. Now this is a pigeon. When you usually think of a pigeon, you think of a bird that's kind of smaller than this. Well, that's because this is the world's largest pigeon. So we have a lot of variety of different kinds of birds, different shapes and sizes, but they all have something in common, and that's that birds have feathers. They use these feathers to fly and to stay warm, but they also do something else. They lay eggs. Now these pigeons right here will lay eggs up in a tree. We just walked past their nest, actually, which was up in one of the trees. I had to walk under it to get over to here, and one of them was sitting in it earlier. Maybe they have an egg in there, maybe not, I don't know. But when they do lay an egg, it's colored white, just like a chicken's egg. When you see a white egg, you can now know what that means. White eggs are eggs that are not laid on the ground. because they don't need to camouflage the egg, because they usually put it up in a hiding place where nothing can really get at it. If you ever see an egg that's not white and it's a bunch of different colors, that's because the mom tried to camouflage the egg so that nothing could find it, and they usually lay those eggs on the ground. So let's see if our pigeons will let us walk through this door, and we'll continue on through to see what else we can find here in the Australasia Pavilion. Okay, let's go into our next room, which is going to be where we'll find a lot of reptiles. So our first exhibit is going to contain two different kinds of reptiles. Hopefully we can see both. But I can see one right now, and what we're going to do is we're going to dive under the water. So reptiles are good at living on land and in the water, and one of the best at doing both of those are turtles. So let's go under the water, and there we have some turtles swimming around. Now, turtles are a type of reptile, so that means that they have scales. In the case of turtles, they have a shell, which are modified scales, and they also do something the same as birds. They lay eggs. Now, these turtles don't lay their eggs underwater, though. They just like to swim underwater. When they go to lay their eggs, they'll lay their eggs on land. And their eggs are white. Now, I said that when you lay eggs on land, you want them to be camouflaged, but what they do is they actually bury their eggs in the dirt or the sand or the mud, so that anything that would try to take those eggs would have a hard time finding them. So it's okay for them to be white. The other difference is that when they lay their eggs, or when birds lay their eggs, it has a hard shell. Anyone who eats eggs knows that there's a hard shell on the outside of the egg. But with turtles and most reptiles, their eggs are soft, so they're not hard. And I'll show you an example of that when we go further into this pavilion. Now, I'm trying to find our tree monitors, and I'm having a difficult time, so I imagine you are too. But they are a little lizard that climbs in the trees. They're black, and they have something in common with the next animal. They have a forked tongue. So can you guess what the next animal might be? Our next animals are snakes. This is a red-tailed green rat snake. And they're hanging out in the trees, just like the tree monitor would do. And they have a forked tongue to be able to smell their environment and to find out what's going on in their environment. And very recently, these specific snakes laid eggs. And where they did it was not out here in the trees. Their eggs would fall. What they did is they used this nest box that we gave them. So they went in here into that little hole, and they laid their eggs in there. Again, they hide their eggs so no one can find them. But this is another example of a reptile. You can see we have scales, and we lay eggs. And the snakes have designed their scales to help them move. So they have nice scales on top of their body that are very protective. But on the bottom, they have special scales. And the scales are all lined up so that when they move their body, those scales help to pull their body along the ground or on the branches. And that's how they move, by pulling themselves along with their scales using their muscles. So those are modified to help them move. And it's really good modification. It means that snakes can pretty much go anywhere. Now we have a few different varieties of snakes here. That was a rat snake. Here we have a boa, also living in the tree, but sitting in the tree in a different kind of way. Now you saw that the rat snakes were spread about their branch, and that's because they're actively looking for things to eat. This boa is also looking for something to eat, but it's doing it in a different way. It's sitting very still and waiting. It's the exact same color as all the leaves that it would be sitting in, and it waits for something to come by, like a bird. And if something comes close enough, it can snatch it right out of the air and pull it in to eat it. So what this snake is doing is ambushing. Instead of going and looking for food, it's waiting for its food to come to it. We also have a green tree python here that looks almost exactly the same, just a little bit different. Now, if we continue down, I will mention that all the animals you're seeing in here and the plants all come from the same parts of the world, from Australia and the islands that surround Australia. So Australia has different habitats. There's lots of lush tropical jungle, but there's also deserts. So we have exhibits here that kind of look like deserts as well, and the animals that might live in them. You might recognize these guys. These are bearded dragons. And bearded dragons are very well adapted for living in dry places where there's not a lot of water. And they get a lot of their water by just eating food that contains water. So they are omnivores, just the same as you and I. They eat meat, they can eat meat, and they can eat vegetables. And here you see that they have some nice greens, and those greens have water in it. So when they eat this, they also get to drink at the same time, and that's how they survive. They look very spiky, don't they? And that helps, if anything thinks that it might want to try and bite them, to think twice about that. So let's keep going. And I'm hoping when I come around this corner, we talked about a tree monitor, and it's a tiny lizard, but I'm hoping we get to see a very, very big lizard over here. And they are actually related to each other. They're both a type of lizard that has a forked tongue. And I can see them there, and this is good. That right there is a Komodo dragon. If you can see on the left-hand side, just relaxing near his heat lamp. So this is a Komodo dragon. This is the largest lizard in the world. Is longer than I am tall. And they live on a tiny little island. Australia is a very, very large island. It's a continent. But where they live on the island of Komodo is very small in comparison. But yet you have this huge lizard. And that's okay, because where the Komodo dragon is found, it doesn't have to worry about fighting over food with anything else. It's the top dog. It gets to get whatever it wants to. So that means it doesn't really have to compete with the other animals, and it can grow as big as it feels like. Now, this Komodo dragon will spend most of its day doing exactly what it's doing here, sitting very still and resting. And that's important because they don't have the ability to control the temperature of their body. You and I, we have the ability to control our temperature of our body. If we get too cold, we start to shiver, and that makes us heat up again. And if we get too hot, we'll start to sweat, and that makes us cool down. And we can maintain and stay at the same temperature all the time, but not the Komodo dragon. The Komodo dragon has to stay the same temperature as the rocks it's sitting on, or the sand it's sitting on, or the air around it. So to be able to be energized, to be able to run around and do whatever they want to, they have to get hot first. So what this Komodo dragon's doing right now is sitting near its heat, getting hotter. Once it's hot enough, it'll then go and walk around and look for its food. Now, Komodo dragons also lay eggs. What's something really crazy about Komodo dragons is once the mom lays the eggs, she buries them and then forgets about them. She never comes back to check on her babies. She just lays the eggs and then goes about the rest of her life. Now, when those babies hatch out of the eggs, the very first instinct they have is to climb up into the nearest tree. The very first instinct you had when you were born was to cry. You cried because it was a signal to your parent to come and help you. That's your instinct. A Komodo dragon's baby's instinct is to climb up a tree. The reason they do that is because Komodo dragons eat baby Komodo dragons. So they have to hide from the adults. Now let's go for a deep dive. Let's go into our oceans and all of the waters that surround Australasia. We'll also get a chance to see some of our amphibians in here as well. Now, I promised that I'd show you what turtle eggs look like, and here you go. So they look kind of like chicken eggs, but they're soft, so they can bend. They're leathery. And that is what reptile eggs typically look like. When we talk about amphibians, amphibians are kind of like a reptile, but they don't have the scales on their body. They just have skin. And here we have some tree frogs that are resting in the corner. And you can see they don't have scales. They have more skin like you and I. And when they lay eggs that are not hard. They're not leathery. They don't even have a shell. They lay eggs without a shell on them. And they lay them in a whole pile, a big batch that's all stuck together. And usually they'll lay them in water because they don't have a shell. And they need that water to help protect them. So these are tree frogs. They live high up in the trees where they look for their bugs that they want to eat. So if any of the mom frogs want to lay eggs, they have to climb all the way down the tree to lay their eggs in water, or find a place high up enough that has water in it all the time to put their eggs. So these are examples of amphibians. Amphibians have something in common with reptiles. They can't make their own body heat, so they have to find somewhere hot to sit so that they can get enough energy to move around and do the things that they want to do. Now, if we keep going deeper into our ocean environment over here, we're going to see some of the coolest animals that I can think of. And the first one you're probably going to say is not even an animal. This is coral. There's different types of coral in here. You can see they're all different shapes. Some of them have branches, like this one here. Some of them look like little tiny umbrellas. Some of them look like aliens. Right here, look at that. Looks like a UFO. Some of them just look like rocks. But they are all different kinds of coral. And coral, believe it or not, all of everything in here is living. It's alive. It's an animal. And it eats just like an animal. And they, believe it or not, make eggs just like animals do. So this coral right here is sleeping. And I know that because all of its tentacles are not really sticking out very far. This coral here is very much awake. It's got all of its tentacles out and waving them around. It's waving them around because it's catching food and pulling the food into its mouth in the middle. So what coral do for their eggs is their eggs are so small you can't even see them. What they do is they don't put them in a nest and sit on them. They push them out into the water and just let their eggs float in the water. And wherever that egg happens to land, it'll stick to the rocks and it'll make a new coral. And that's how coral makes a coral reef. Now, who might be living in that coral reef? Let's take a look. Here's a good example of an animal you would find living in the coral reef. That's a seahorse. So obviously a seahorse is not a real horse. They just kind of look like a horse. That's why people call them that. They're a type of fish. And they're a really neat kind of fish. They're not shaped like a normal fish. They have a tail with no fins on it. And they don't really seem to have a fin on the side of their body either. They just have a fin on their back. And that's how they swim, by moving their little fin on their back. But it's not very good. It's good if the water stays perfectly still like this, but if you live in the ocean and the water's always moving, it's very hard to move around. So what that tail does is they can use it like that to hold on to stuff. So seahorses usually live close to coral so they can hold on with their tail. And then they'll eat their food. Now what's really neat is being a fish, fish are the same as birds and reptiles and amphibians. They lay eggs. In the seahorse world, the mom lays her eggs, but she lays the eggs inside a pouch on the front of the dad. So the dad ends up carrying the eggs in his pouch on his front until they hatch into little tiny baby seahorses. That's pretty neat. So fish are not too similar to all the other animals we've seen so far. They breathe water instead of air, but they do have scales on their body to protect them, just like reptiles. And they lay eggs just like reptiles in amphibians. Now there's another animal that's also you'd find in a coral reef, but he's not in here right now. This is where the lionfish would have been. But you know what happened? The lionfish wasn't feeling very well. So our team of veterinarians came and picked him up and took him to their hospital, and they're taking care of him right now. And while that's happening, the keepers are cleaning out the exhibit to make it brand new for when he comes back. Now we saw seahorses, but of course there's fish that live in coral reefs as well. Here's a beautiful example of lots of different ones that live in this giant tank. And you can see they're very, very colorful. Something that's neat to know about fish is if you see fish that are very colorful, that's because they want you to look at them. That's why they have those colors. So usually these are fish you would find swimming around in the daytime. There are some fish that swim around in the nighttime though. And when they do that, it's nighttime, you can't see. So you don't really have to worry about being colorful. So usually those fish are very dark browns or grays. And if you look very closely down underneath that piece of coral, you can see that there's a shark down there. And the shark is a brownish color because that shark usually comes out at night. So he's sleeping right now during the day. Now, if I turn around and take another look here, we find an even more fascinating animal you might find in the ocean. And that is our jellyfish. And jellyfish are animals too. They're what's called an invertebrate. So an animal that doesn't have a backbone. And here they are swimming around. They kind of look just like flat little pancakes of jelly. And that's probably what they even feel like too. But they're definitely an animal. They can move around. You see that they're pulsing their bell in hopes that it helps push them forward. But just like the seahorse, they're not the greatest swimmers in the world. They are only able to go where the water takes them, and then just push a little bit to try and change which direction they're facing. And that's okay with them because they like to float around in the water because everything they're trying to eat is floating in the water with them. Can you see that? Do you see all that dust? That's not dust. We keep this tank very clean. That's food. And what they're doing is they're floating around using their tentacles to pick up all those little tiny pieces of food and bring it back to themselves so that they can have something to eat. You can see that they have a lot of food in the middle. That's what that orange stuff is in the center. Now we're going to come back in because I wanted to give a chance for some of our animals to come out because we did walk past one of them, and that's where we'll stop for our day. And if we see them, that's good. I hope so. If not, that's okay. We can describe them a little bit. And that's our wombats. So we're just going to come back inside the main pavilion here. Take a looky. Now, a wombat is a marsupial. And a marsupial is a very special type of mammal. It's a special type of mammal because the moms have pouches that they keep their babies in. Kangaroos are a type of marsupial. Wombats are too. And what's neat about marsupials is they're native to Australia. You don't usually find marsupials living pretty much anywhere else in the world except for in Australasia. And our wombats, I don't know if you can see them or not, are back there in their little house and they're snacking on some grass right now. But a wombat looks like a fuzzy little pig, and they have a pouch, so the females have a pouch, and that's where the baby will grow up. Now, wombats are also very good at one thing. They're the best at something. Let me show you what they're the best at. They're the best at digging. Look at all of that. They've dug all these holes in here and dug up all the dirt, rooting around trying to find something to eat or to make a home in the ground. So they're really good at digging. Now the problem is, if you're digging, that means you're pushing dirt underneath yourself to move it out of the way. And when you do that, if you have a pouch, you might get dirt in your pouch, which is not really good if you have a baby in there. So the wombats have adapted and changed their pouch so the pouch faces backwards. That way, when they dig, they don't end up filling their pouch up with dirt. So I hope you guys had a good time today. I hope you were able to learn a few things about the life cycles of animals and the different kinds of animals that you can find in Australasia. I will say that Australasia Pavilion is just one of many different places and regions that we have here at the Toronto Zoo. We have lots more of space to explore and different animals to be able to go and see. And this is just a little part of that. So we hope that in the future, you might feel so inclined to come back and visit again and go and see more of those different places. In fact, you can contact us at any time and book an opportunity to go and visit the place of your choice. You can actually choose which area you want to go to and what animals you might want to see. So I'm going to send out a question to all of you, all the educators and the classes. I want you to tell me what your favorite animal is in the whole world. I want you to take a vote in your class. What is your favorite animal in the whole world? And I want you to send it to me. I want you to send it to me at this email, schools@torontozoo.ca. And just send an email to me saying, hey, Sean, our class from this school says that our favorite animal in the whole world is, and then you tell me. I want to hear from you. I want to know which animals you really love. Was it one of the animals that we saw here in Australasia, or is it another animal from some other part of the zoo? And then if you let me know that, I'll write back to you and help you out with information about that animal. So for now, I think we've seen everything we're going to see here in this building. I hope you learned lots, and please keep on supporting the zoo as much as you can. We really appreciate everything that you guys have done for us. We're very, very grateful. Happy New Year to everyone, and have a great day.